This is Linda Favela, Proverbs 3a. It seems the woman wisdom is still the speaker here, although Solomon hasn't mentioned her in a while. Whether it's her or Solomon or God speaking, the point is we're hearing some golden advice. The first 12 verses of this chapter come two at a time. Verse 1. My son, don't forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. For length of days and years of life and peace they'll add to you. Comment, the first two verses we just read are typical of the Proverbs. There's the advice and then the reasoning behind the advice. In this case, wisdom says, don't forget my teachings. Then she gives the reason, which is that we'll live long and peaceful lives. Of course, this proverb doesn't always hold true. For example, Jesus didn't forget wisdom, and he died young. So we can scoff at the proverb if we choose, or we can keep in mind that that's the nature of a proverb. A proverb is something that tends to hold true, but not always. Where it applies, we apply it. Where it doesn't, we don't. Again, God said not to add or subtract anything from the law of Moses, Deuteronomy 4:2. That made it unlawful for an Israelite such as Solomon to write more law. So the Proverbs aren't laws. They're just for our consideration. We pick and choose Proverbs according to the situation. The Proverbs are tools. We pick the tool that fits the job, and in the same way, we pick the proverb that fits the situation. If our friends are putting on parachutes and jumping off cliffs, it's a good time to remember the proverb in verses 1 and 2, which again is that wisdom adds length of days, years of life, and peace. Just to make things a little more complicated, the peaceful part spoken of in verse 2 happens to be a blanket promise that in every case God will provide believers with peace. Jesus said, I give you peace, John 14:27. The first miracle your narrator experienced was that the moment he accepted Christ at the age of 15, he had peace which has never left him since that time. Now the next two verses, verse 3. Don't let kindness and truth forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart, so you'll find favor and good understanding in the sight of God and man. Comment, bind kindness and truth around your neck in verse 3. The marriage of truth and kindness is an interesting deal because it's quite the art to keep those two from squabbling. The truth can be harsh, which offends the kindness in us, and kindness can be wimpy, offending the truth in us, refusing to speak the truth. So the question is, how do we marry kindness and truth and keep them together? For the sake of kindness, we don't always tell every truth. If there's no way to speak the truth kindly, we just don't speak it. If we can figure out how to marry the two, we'll find favor with God and man and show our good understanding in verse 4. It should be a puzzle that we're constantly trying to solve, how to come forth with the truth if something needs to be said, but in a kind way. Of the two, kindness should be always, and truth should be always as well, but only the truth we need to speak, and only if there's thorough kindness in it. We never go wrong with kindness assuming we're telling the truth, and we never go wrong with the truth assuming we're being kind. So kindness and truth are a volatile couple. They're both awesome and both necessary, but they need constant marriage counseling. Skipping to another proverb in verses 5 and 6 and a related one in 7 and 8. Trust in Yahweh with all your heart and don't lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him and He'll make your paths straight. Don't be wise in your own eyes. Fear Yahweh and depart from evil. It'll be health to your body and nourishment to your bones. Comment, verses 5 and 6 are some of the most memorized in the Bible. In verse 5, trust in Yahweh with all your heart and don't lean on your own understanding. It's not a suggestion that we throw away our understanding across the board. If we understand how to cook an egg, then by all means, let's use our understanding. But when a conflict arises between our understanding and a clear commandment of God, when we fully know that commandment is applicable, we go with the commandment. Thou shalt not steal, for example. Maybe our understanding is that we can get away with it, but God's understanding is that stealing is wrong. It's time to go with God's understanding. He understands stealing never works out, so let's go with that. And besides clear commandments, there'll be times we know God's telling us to do this or that. For example, God told Abraham to leave his home country and sojourn in a foreign land. To Abraham's understanding, that didn't make sense. He had no way of knowing, other than what God told him, that he could find pasture for his animals or that the locals wouldn't rob him and kill him. But God clearly told him to go, so it was time to lean on God's understanding and not on his own. Then in verse 6, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he'll direct your paths. That's been so impactful for so many of us. One aspect of it is that so much of the time the right and wrong of a situation tells us which way to go. The moral way is God's way, and the immoral way is the devil's way. It comes down to simple morality so often. If we do the right thing, we're on God's path. God uses right and wrong to direct us. If there's one way that's a little bit shady and another way that's completely honest, we have our clear direction from God right there that we need to take the honest path. He blesses that honest path. He blesses us simply when we do the right thing. Our reputation grows from doing the right thing, and our station in life grows as we do it as a matter of course. Your narrator heard a former member of the Nixon administration speaking at his church in the 1980s about the Watergate scandal that occurred in the 1970s. Some of the highest up in Nixon's administration went to jail over it. But the observing Christian in the group wasn't involved. He learned later that the perpetrators kept him out of the loop on that scandal because they literally said to each other, "Let's not let him in on it. He's too much of a Boy Scout." So his reputation for doing the right thing kept him out of it. He had no knowledge of it whatsoever. Otherwise, he would have surely been in the middle of it. It was because he had a reputation for acknowledging God in all his ways, so they didn't involve him. In verses 7 and 8, don't be wise in your own eyes. Fear Yahweh and depart from evil. It'll be health to your body and nourishment to your bones, end quote. There's an illusion that ignoring God will pay off, like the illusion Eve had of all the good things that would happen if she ate the fruit. Health to the body and nourishment to the bones don't come from ignoring God. That comes from fearing God and departing from evil. We'll all eventually have a fatal illness or injury at some point, something that'll kill us, take us down to the grave. But in our departing from evil, we'll have the consolation in sickness and in health, a consolation of soul. It'll be health and nourishment to our soul if we fear God and depart from evil. Verse 9, honor Yahweh with your substance, with the first fruits of all your increase, so your barns will be filled with plenty and your vats will overflow with new wine. Comment, honor God with your substance, which is your material goods or your money, and he'll fill your barns and vats with plenty. Jesus noticed the widow when she put the 2 mites in the collection box, and he was keenly aware and deeply impressed that she gave all she had, everything she had to live on. The Gospels don't say what happened to the woman after that, but we trust God took care of her. So what's the big deal of us honoring God with our substance? God won't be offended when we give if we expect him to fill our barns with plenty and make our vats overflow with wine. Not saying he'll make us rich, just saying what he said. Verse 11, my son, don't despise Yahweh's discipline, neither be weary of his reproof. For whom Yahweh loves, he reproves, even as a father reproves the son in whom he delights. Comment, to reprove means to express disapproval. There might be some negative consequences along with the disapproval. Let's not be discouraged when we're in the midst of that. It's a sign he loves us. Whom Yahweh loves, he reproves, in verse 12. In the midst of it, let's dwell on how much he loves us. Proverbs 3b is next.